Dear friends, dear students, welcome to today's comparative politics PhD class. Today I'll be speaking largely about constitutions. In democratic states, generally there is a constitution. It might be written or unwritten. It might be flexible. Flexible means easy to change, or it might be rigid. Rigid means difficult to change. And the constitution defines and controls the state. It creates the basic legal and political logic of the state. Which institution controls to what extent authority, how a decision is made, how the courts are working, so on and so forth. And no constitution is believed to be perfect, and additionally, no factor can prevent the constitution from being anti-democratic. So, a constitution might be anti-democratic as well. It might be democratic, or it might also be anti-democratic. There is no certain check or balance that will, prevent a constitution from being anti-democratic. And when the constitutional reform is made, when the constitution is changed, amended, it actually means redefining the distribution of power between various institutions and organs within the state. Rigid constitution, for instance, requires supermajority to renew a constitution, and judicial review is present. On the other hand, in flexible constitution, the simple majority is just okay to renew the constitution. For instance, the simple majority is 50% plus 1, while the supermajority is generally 2/3 of a parliament. And in flexible constitutions, judicial review is absent, and the judicial review is dealt by the parliament, because the people who are making the laws are actually asked, if necessary, to interpret the laws. Dear friends, in United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Israel, the constitutions are unwritten, and unwritten constitutions are rather rare. And in New Zealand and United Kingdom, there is consensus on fundamental political norms, and that makes the UK and New Zealand constitutions to be performed easily because of a consensus on political norms. On the other hand, Israel tried to have a written constitution but failed, particularly due to the state-religion relations. Some written constitutions are as flexible as unwritten ones. This is another important topic. And unwritten constitutions are flexible by nature, and they lack judicial review. Since there are no, for instance, written constitution, there is a different process followed for judicial review. For instance, in French constitutional amendments of 1958 and 1974 were not checked by judicial review. Judicial review means the parliament or the executive, they take a decision, and finally the Court of the Constitution, or the Supreme Court, decides whether that action is compatible to the Constitution or not. Dear friends, as I've told you previously, flexibility means the simple majority enough to change the Constitution, and it is 50% plus 1. And rigidity is actually, there are various forms of rigidity. For instance, 2/3 majority, less than 2/3 but more than simple majority. For instance, the 3/5 majority, or more than 2/3 majority, that is actually 3/4 majority. So you see there are various forms of rigidity. To renew a constitution in some countries, you require 2/3 majority in the parliament. In some others, you require 2/3 more than simple majority. And in some others, for instance, you might require 3/5 majority, and in some others, you might require more than 2/3, that is 3/4 majority. Dear friends, approval by ordinary and special majorities of state or provincial legislatures in both houses, in bicameral legislatives, I mean, approval by referendum and approval by special majorities in a referendum are also various conditions, preconditions for constitutional amendments. And in each country has its own way of amending the constitution. Majorities and supermajorities required for constitutional amendment in 36 democracies. There will be a gap here from 1945 till 2010. For instance, supermajorities greater than 2/3 were required in Argentina, South Korea and Germany, Australia and Switzerland, Canada and United States, and Japan. 2/3 majorities or equivalent were asked in Austria, Malta, Bahamas, Mauritius, Belgium, Netherlands, Costa Rica, Norway, Finland, Portugal, India, Spain, Jamaica, Trinidad, and Luxembourg. And special majorities between 2/3 and ordinary majorities, that is to say, more than simple majority, 50% plus 1, but less than 2/3 were required in Barbados, Greece, France, Botswana, Ireland, Sweden, Denmark, Italy, and post-1980 Sweden. And ordinary majorities to renew the constitution in Iceland, in United Kingdom, in France, but before 1974, not after, for France, Israel, Uruguay, and Sweden before 1980, in Sweden, not after, and New Zealand, just ordinary majority, simple majority, that is to say, 50% plus 1 is okay to amend the constitution in those countries. And there are some various forms of constitutional amendments in different countries. We might have a brief look at them. For instance, in Italy, the constitutional law needs to be approved by at least a majority of MPs in each house, and it should be absolute majority in its second reading. Depending on the results of the second vote, the constitutional law may then follow two different paths. So there are two different options, two different results. If the bill is approved by a qualified majority of 2/3 of members in each house, it can be immediately promulgated by the President of the Republic and become a law. But if the bill is approved by a majority of members in each house, but not enough to reach the qualified majority of 2/3, it does not immediately become law. Instead, it must first be published in the official Gazette, the official journal where all Italian laws are published. It's named Official Gazette. Within 3 months after its publication, a constitutional referendum may be requested by either 500,000 voters, 5 regional councils, or 1/5 of the members of a house of a parliament. Either 500,000 voters or 5 regional councils or 1/5 of the member of a house of 1/5 of the members of the House of Representatives, the Parliament actually, the Parliament, 1/5 of the members of the Parliament should demand a referendum. If no constitutional referendum has been requested after 3 months is a deadline there, the bill can be promulgated and becomes law. If a constitutional referendum is requested in order to become a law, the bill must be approved by a majority of vote casts by the whole electorate, so it means nationwide. No quorum is required, meaning that the referendum turnout has no effect on its validity, and unlike other referendums in Italy. So, in the constitutional referendums, there is no minimum turnout limit to make the referendum valid. So let me say if just 40% of the people attending to the referendum, constitutional referendum, or 30% or 20%, it is still valid. In Belgium, the Constitution of Belgium can be amended by the federal legislative power, which consists of the king, in practice, the federal government, and the federal parliament. In order to amend the constitution, the federal legislative power must declare the reasons to revise the constitution in accordance with the Article 195. This is done by means of two so-called declarations of revisions of the Constitution, one adopted by the Chamber of Representatives and the Senate, and one signed by the King and the federal government. The parliament is automatically dissolved. This is important in Belgium. When you are going to renew the Constitution, you also renew the elections first. And a new federal election must take place. This makes impossible to amend the Constitution unless an election has intervened. This is important. Following the election, the new federal parliament can amend those articles that have been declared revisable. Neither chamber can consider amendments to the Constitution unless at least 2/3 of its members are present, and the Constitution can only be amended if at least 2/3 of the votes are in favor of the amendment. The French-speaking and Dutch-speaking members of the legislation is required for constitutional amendments, and the French-speaking minority enjoys a veto right here. They are smaller in number, but their political say, their political word is actually equal with that of the Dutch-speaking. In United Kingdom, a 2/3 supermajority vote of members present, assuming that a quorum exists in both Senate and House of Representatives of the Congress. This is the regular process of constitutional amendments in the United States. Another example of us today is Denmark. The Constitution of Denmark provides an example of multiple special procedures that must be followed. After an amendment has been approved by the parliament, a general election must be held. The new parliament must then approve the amendment, and again before it is finally submitted to a referendum. There is also a requirement that at least 40% of eligible voters must vote at the referendum in order for an amendment to validly be passed. So, in Italy there was no minimum turnout limit, but in Denmark it is 40%. So if 38% of the population just attends, 38% of the voters just attend the constitutional referendum, it is not valid. In France, amendments to the Constitution of France must first be passed by both houses with identical terms, and then they need approval either by a simple majority in a referendum or by a 3/5 majority of the two houses of the French Parliament jointly convened in Congress. So, if 3/5 of the majority of the parliament in France, they are okay with the constitutional amendment, there is no need to hold a referendum. In Switzerland, the constitution is amended by referendum. Regardless of what it is amended by a referendum. The majority of people in the majority of 26 cantons should vote for. When they vote for, the majority, when they vote for the constitutional amendment, it is, passed. But what is a requirement here? It should be the majority in the nationwide, in the country average, in addition to the majority of 26 cantons. That is to say, the entire nation as a whole would say yes, and at least 14 cantons in their average would say yes. And Turkey, another example, as long as you have 3/5 majority in the parliament, you need referendum, but if you have 2/3 majority in the parliament, you don't need referendum to amend the Turkish constitutions. And there are some countries lacking judicial review. They are Finland, New Zealand, and Belgium before 1984. Israel, Sweden, before 1974, of course, for Sweden, Luxembourg, Italy, before 1956 in Italy, Switzerland, Netherlands, and United Kingdom. In such examples, there is a lack of judicial review. Dear friends, today's class is over. Thank you for listening me, and see you in the forthcoming class. Thank you.